In our last session, we introduced the passage in Revelation 20, which speaks of the 1,000 years, the millennial reign of Jesus. And we introduced the idea that there are three differing views that have come into the Christian church over recent centuries. Revelation paints this picture of a 1,000-year reign. And the first way that this is being interpreted in some more recent years has been what's called amillennialism. And this view holds that there's actually no future millennium, that what we're reading in Revelation 20 is actually being fulfilled in the church age today. It interprets this whole passage as happening now, but we're actually living in what we read in Revelation 20. So it's basically saying that the church age is happening now, and then at the end of the church age, Jesus will return. There'll be a resurrection of all, rapture, physical, bodily resurrection of both believers and unbelievers, and then there'll be the judgment, after which believers will enter into the new heavens and the new earth, and the unbelievers will go to eternal punishment. That is the outline of it, but what is it that amillennialists actually believe? So what does this view actually believe? Well, firstly, it believes that when Jesus came the first time, that he conquered Satan, that he bound Satan. So when we read of Satan being bound in the bottomless pit, that's what happened from Jesus' first coming. And when Jesus returned to heaven and said in Matthew 28, verse 18, with the Great Commission, all authority in heaven and earth is given to me, that's an indication that the millennium kingdom has begun. Satan's influence has been reduced, so now the gospel can be preached to all nations. And Christians who have died during this time, they now reign with Christ in heaven. So that picture of reigning for the millennium is actually a picture of reigning in heaven. It's taking the view that Jesus' first coming sort of initiated this, so it's not talking about a second bodily return to bring in the millennium kingdom, and that the 1,000 years is figurative, not specific. So when Jesus comes a second time, the rapture and the resurrection will happen simultaneously, and when we talk about all the end times events, all these end time events are sort of happening at the same time when Jesus comes back. As you might expect, this view is based on some biblical basis. It takes Revelation 20 verses 1 to 6 as, it refers to the millennium. And it says that because this is the only place in the Bible that it's actually referred to, it's not cross-referenced by anywhere, it must be figurative. But some people would argue that something only has to be in the Bible once for it to be true. Revelation 20 verses 1 to 3, where it talks about Satan being bound by Jesus and thrown into the pit, that's interpreted as having happened when Jesus came the first time, that he came in his earthly ministry, bound Satan. Luke 10 verse 18 is a verse that might be used for that. So when it talks about Satan's influence being restricted, it's because he's been bound as a result of Jesus' first coming. And being bound to stop the deception of the nations, there would be an argument that the church age is evidence of this, where the church has grown across the world. It looks at Revelation 20 verse 4, where it talks about the souls of believers, not physical bodies, and where verse 5 talks about the first resurrection and sees that as going to heaven, where either Jesus' resurrection was the first resurrection, and the rest of the dead are not raised for a further 1,000 years. This is what that passage says. So the way that it interprets the church age is Jesus was the first resurrection, and the rest of believers are resurrected at the end of the millennial kingdom, the millennial rule, which is believed to be figurative, not literal. Amillennialists would also hold that the Bible teaches that there's only one resurrection, and would point to passages like John 5 verses 28 to 29, where Jesus is saying, "The time is coming when all the dead in their graves will hear the voice of God's Son, and they will rise again. Those who have done good will rise to experience eternal life, and those who have continued in evil will rise to experience judgment." So it sees that sense of this rising of the dead happening at once, and points to other verses as well, like Daniel 12 verse 2 or Acts 24 verse 15. It also suggests that the idea of a millennial kingdom where you've got glorified and unglorified sinners, so glorified believers and unglorified sinners, living together, it just finds that too difficult a concept to have if Jesus were to have returned to reign. And if Jesus is reigning, how could sin continue? People can still reject Jesus, and it points towards a final battle. And amillennialists would struggle with all of those and say, how can that be the case if there's this resurrection to go to be with Jesus? One of the things I promised was I would try and present what the Bible has to say to allow you to weigh up the evidence for yourself and form your own views. And as I've been going through this, you may find yourself starting to look at some of what we've already looked at and go, well, how could that hold with this, or how could we hold with that? Or you might be looking at it and saying, actually, it helps to confirm some things. Whatever it is that you take from this, can I encourage you to continue to have that spirit of grace, that spirit of open-handed, open-heartedness towards other people who may or may not believe the same as you?